again, everybody, and welcome to the LSU Sports Insider Podcast. Today is Monday, November the 18th. I'm Zach Ewing, your host, along with Scott Rabalais, our advocate sports columnist, and Wilson Alexander, our LSU football beat writer. So welcome in, guys. And you're back from Gainesville as of yesterday. LSU showed up, technically. No, it was a bad fourth quarter. We talked about it in the postgame show with Koki and Reed, but just kind of getting your final thoughts before we jump into the show here on recapping that one. Just, I mean, a pretty disastrous day for LSU.
Yeah, this was a bad day. It was really over the last 3 years. It feels like you've hit a low point now in where this program's at under Brian Kelly, because it's the first time that they've lost 3 straight games under Brian Kelly. This is one that LSU could have had a chance to really sort of take control of in the third quarter, driving down into the red zone, ends up having to settle for a field goal. And then after that, the wheels just kind of fell off for the most part. And the offense was incredibly inefficient. The defense continued to allow explosive plays and get gashed a little bit in the run game, which has been a problem over the past 3 games in particular. And it's just wild to think that we were sitting here about a month ago talking about how this team was evolving into a potential playoff contender. And even sitting about a month ago at halftime of the Texas A&M game, starting to really think about those possibilities as well. And then now they've lost 3 straight, and they've been outscored 100-35 in the last 10 quarters. And you have to try to salvage what's left of a season that has been completely derailed.
Rab?
Just starting from the big picture of how the season has devolved, it's bad football. They're playing bad football. They're playing like a bad football team. They're showing flashes here and there. Nussmeier had a great touchdown pass to Aaron Anderson, I believe, in the game. The defense made some big stops when put in tough spots, but they just can't do enough to win. And these have all been double-digit losses. I mean, these all end up being double. It's not like, they lost by a field goal. They got lost by a touchdown. They got nipped here and there. No, they just kind of cracked as the game went on. And I'm not entirely shocked to see LSU get to this point in the season and be 6-4, but I'm shocked, a little shocked at the way it's happened. They've just lost their confidence. They were playing with confidence and swagger at Arkansas. Then they went to A&M most of the game doing that, and it's just evaporated. And especially the lack of success on offense is really shocking. I mean, they've had some injuries, but boy, it's like one thing we were saying on the way back from the game Saturday. One thing every year under Kelly has been a huge problem. Special teams was a huge problem in year one. Last year was the defense. Now it seems to be becoming the offense. Not that the defense was great Saturday in a lot of cases, but now it seems to be becoming the offense. And I don't know what to expect in these last 2 games. I really don't.
Yeah, it's kind of been whiplash over the second half of the season. You're just not sure what you've got in this team. And you mentioned it specifically. We're going to zone in on the offense today and figure out exactly what's wrong. Wilson, you said 100-35 over the last 10 quarters. Neither one of those point totals is good. You don't want to be giving up 10 points a quarter. You don't want to be only scoring 3.5 points a quarter. But I think the offense is where we expected this team to really be competitive. And so that's why we're going to try to play doctor and diagnose what went wrong and maybe how they could show some signs of fixing it over the last 2 weeks. First, want to let you know that the LSU Sports Insider is brought to you by Waste Pro. Tiger fans, if you're planning a tailgate or event, keep your guests comfortable with portable toilets from Waste Pro. Call 225-744-6400 and mention the LSU Sports Insider for a special offer. We're going to take a break, and when we come back, we're going to begin that kind of diagnosis of the offense and much more to talk about on this episode as well.
Experience the convenience and cleanliness that Waste Pro brings to Mardi Gras, LSU tailgates, and festivals with our top-notch portable toilet services. Perfect for large crowds and community events. Join the countless satisfied families and organizers who trust Waste Pro to keep their gatherings spotless and sanitary. Discover more about our services and make your next event a success at wasteprousa.com.
There's no better place to parlay than Caesars Sportsbook. Parlay Builder gives you all the game day action from all across the league. Multiple games, legs, and props, all in one spot. It's so quick and easy, you can keep your focus on the games and your nachos. Or if you're focusing on one game, remember, you can place your same game parlays live during the action. Caesars Sportsbook, the only sportsbook app with Caesars rewards.
Okay, welcome back. Diagnosing the offense. See a picture of Joe Sloan on the screen there. He's kind of public enemy number 1 or maybe number 2 behind Brian Kelly. I don't know.
Probably number 2.
Yeah.
Can I say one thing right here?
Go ahead,
The LSU is kind of like experiencing guilt by association. There's so many people around the country who dislike Brian Kelly. They don't like him for whatever reason, from his Notre Dame days, or how he left Cincinnati for Notre Dame, how he left Notre Dame for LSU, and they're really relishing the fact that LSU is struggling right now. So I would say he's public enemy number 1 overall. Yeah.
Every video we post, there's some non-LSU fan. I mean, LSU fans are angry enough with him, but there's some non-LSU fan who comes in and goes, "See, you got what you got. I knew about Brian Kelly." I mean,
Exactly.
He's 26-11 at LSU. Let's not bury him yet, but he's certainly in the crosshairs.
Yeah, he is. I mean, like we said, they lost 3 straight games.
And don't do that here.
Yeah, that's some context on that. That's happened 3 times since 2000, basically, since '99 season. 2015, they lost 3 straight games. They ended up keeping Les Miles after a lot of discussion if they were going to fire him. But then early the next season, after they lose 2 games, they fire Les Miles. And then right after firing Ed Orgeron during the 2021 season, they lost 3 straight games. And so usually when that happens around here, changes get made. And while I don't think any of us expect them to fire Brian Kelly, they might have an offseason here again where you're making some kind of staff change for the 3rd year in a row. We'll have to see, over the next few weeks how things play out, of course. But when you're struggling the way you are, that tends to be what happens around here.
Yeah, it's been bad, and this Florida game in particular was interesting because LSU did dominate the time of possession, especially in the first half. They did have a reasonably high success rate where they're staying ahead of the chains and moving the chains. I mean, they were 13 of 25 on 3rd down, which is a good percentage. It's just not a good number.
You don't want to be on 3rd down that much.
Right, exactly. And
that was an absurd number to be going for it on 3rd down that often.
Well, the problem with that is you don't have any explosive plays, right? I mean, you're just not, outside of the touchdown pass to Anderson, you're not ripping off chunks like they were even just a month ago against Ole Miss. They survived by, the offense wasn't great, but there was enough explosive plays to keep the ball moving. Those have dried up. Is that a defensive adjustment you think that LSU is seeing and unable to adjust back to? Is that we'll talk about Garrett Dellinger in a minute, where the offensive line has struggled? I mean, how do you diagnose that?
No, I think it's on your offense, because you played some really good defenses at times this season, South Carolina and Ole Miss in particular, where you still had success offensively. Now, Ole Miss, you had not scored, but I guess once until the very end of regulation and then overtime. So that kind of covers up what had for a long part of that game been some struggles offensively, but you still have to talk about it in the context of an entire game, and they were able to make those plays at the end. And like you said, have explosives. And those explosive plays have completely gone away. One stat here comes from Bill Connolly of ESPN that I think is pretty enlightening. Nussmeier is averaging 3.3 air yards per completion, which ranks 100th over the past 3 games. And, over the first 8 weeks of the season, LSU was both fairly efficient and fairly explosive. And now the efficiency in particular has just completely gone away. Rab and I joke about how it's like their best play is 3rd and 9. Nussmeier making something happen with his arm. And, they've been, I guess, explosive in those moments. And explosive could be relative in that it's like you're picking up 12 yards on 3rd and 9 to keep something moving. But it's not a recipe for long-term success. And we've seen that in this game, I think, in particular, where you couldn't convert in the red zone. You couldn't really sustain drives. They're moving the ball, in spots, but they aren't able to sort of throw the dagger at you. And Florida was doing that a ton. Florida had 7 completions over 15 yards. 5 of them came in the second half. And LSU, conversely, wasn't able to move the ball consistently, and especially not, like you said, in an explosive manner. When you average 4.2 yards per play, easily a season low. I think that's more of an indictment on the offense than it is on the defenses that they've played. Things just seem sort of broken right now.
Another stat that Bill Connolly mentioned, his column on ESPN, that stuck out to me. It's funny you mentioned it, because I was actually just looking it up. They are, over the past 3 games, 4 weeks, 3 games for LSU. The Tigers are 122nd in the country in percentage of plays gaining 0 or negative yards. 39% of their plays, Scott, have gained either nothing, so incomplete pass, or a run stuff, or have lost yardage. That is a massive number, especially when you couple it with the fact that you're not getting explosives.
Yeah, if you were being a ball control offense, moving the ball down the field, consistently, okay, it's taking you a while. You're maybe not hitting the 40-yard touchdown pass that often, but that's it certainly works for teams a lot. But yeah, it's gain a few yards, and the running game was not too bad overall against Florida.
Not by previous standard. Anyway.
Yeah, they rushed for 120 yards after all the sack yardage was taken away from Nussmeier. I think he lost like 46 or 48 yards. So they rushed for over 160 yards, rushing the ball. So that was pretty good. But they get a rush, and then there's a penalty. They get a rush, they complete a pass, and then there's a sack. They make some kind of positive play. And then there were at least 3 drops in the game. The rhythm has been non-existent for this offense. And a lot of that, you can go back to the Ole Miss game. You said, Nussmeier's, throwing about 50% completions. They just hit more big plays in that game. It was kind of like that. It was kind of feast or famine. And it's in modern college football where most of the time you are starting from your 25 or 20 yard line, because the way kicking rules are, you have to be more consistent and more have a more rhythm in your offense, and they just haven't had it, and nor has the defense set them up with very many short fields. Other than the Arkansas game was a big one, obviously, when Weeks got that tipped interception. But yeah, it's bad, and there are a lot of reasons for it. You could blame Joe Sloan's play calling. You could blame Garrett Nussmeier's lack of confidence, and you certainly could blame the offensive line, which is just had big problems. DJ Chester has not been an effective blocker all year long at center. They lose Dellinger, who's injured, and then they had another injury at the right guard spot. So they were just it's not anything exotic. I think teams are doing to LSU. They're coming right at him, coming right at Nussmeier, and he can't get away.
Yeah, kind of looking back, we all maybe got caught up in the moment a little bit after the Ole Miss game and the Arkansas game, but it's not really a sustainable way to play offense where you're moving back, and then you make a big play on 3rd and 11 or on 2nd and 14 or whatever. At least not if you don't have Joe Burrow, Justin Jefferson, Jamar Chase, or Jaden Daniels and Malik Neighbors. Like, you don't have the personnel to continue to do that.
No, and to go back to those moments, like you said, maybe we got caught up in it. The reason that we were sort of like, oh, hey, maybe this team is evolving is because that you went on to the Arkansas game and you were efficient. You were, able to convert in short yardage and have a productive enough run game and not put everything on Garrett Nussmeier. And I guess let's talk about Garrett a little bit, because there's been so much put on his shoulders all year because this running game has not been productive. But like you said, the running game was there this week. But then I think the best example of why this offense has struggled is like in the red zone. I mean, they just cannot score touchdowns in the red zone. And some of that is on Garrett. We saw the pick against Alabama last week. Some of it, Brian Kelly has said, is when you have a quarterback who is not, sort of experienced in those moments, like he's got to be really perfect in the short field. You got to be super precise, and he hasn't been. And in general, over these past couple of games, he's thrown for less than 300 yards. His completion percentage remains, pretty much under 65%. He didn't throw an interception in this game, but he did have the fumble still. And, I still hesitate to put a ton of this on Garrett, but there has been a little bit of regression here in the second half of the season, really over the last 4 games, where, and maybe that's why more of a product of playing tougher SEC defenses. I think as a first-year starter here, he needs to get more used to the speed that he's seeing. And a lot of it has also been since Dellinger went out. And maybe that's where Dellinger's loss really hurts, is that there's been more pressure on him. Only 2 sacks through the first 8 games, I guess it was. 1, 2, 3, 4. 2 sacks through the first 7 games. And now there's been 11 sacks since then, and a season-high 7 allowed against Florida. And I think that's probably rattling him, and I think he's pressing a little bit.
Well, while you touch on that, let's go ahead and do today's injury report, brought to you by the Baton Rouge Clinic, and that is that Garrett Dellinger did not play in this game. And Scott, look, the offensive line has been kind of disappointing, underwhelming all year long, considering
not
the
just
talent.
kind of. No, it's been the biggest problem.
Yeah, it's. I mean, and then you take away Dellinger, and you could look at it and say, oh, is the starting left guard that important? I mean, our news organization covers another team in the Saints where they lost their center, and things just seem to, like, it's kind of like a house of cards, and you take one out and all of a sudden the sum of that parts is just not where it needs to be.
Yeah, I think going back to DJ Chester, I don't want to pick on him too much. He is a freshman playing in the SEC,
redshirt freshman,
right in the middle, but an experienced player.
Yeah,
and I think Dellinger probably was covering up some of his deficiencies. And Paul Mobinga, they put in there, like, he's doing the best he can, but he was getting just crushed on Saturday. And then Tyree Adams, I got to give him a lot of credit. If you would say everything was bad, that guy, Kelly said he could play kind of in an emergency role. I don't know how many snaps he ended up getting, but I'm sure it was more than they expected. Kelly said maybe he could play a dozen snaps or so, and he played a lot when Miles Frazier went out in the first half with an ankle injury, and Frazier came back in the second half. But credit to that young man. I'm sure he was playing hurt, and he kept in there as long as they needed him.
26 snaps.
There you go. No one expected him to play that much against Florida. So, but it's been bad, and it brings into question. We were talking about, could Kelly be making some changes again? I don't think you can do anything on the defensive side because you just changed the whole staff. But Bo Davis, the offensive line coach, if anybody's on the hot seat along with Joe Sloan and Cortez Hankton, it's him.
Brad Davis.
Brad Davis. Bo Davis is the defensive line coach. Too many Davises coaching lines at LSU. Thank you. But it's been a huge problem and a huge disappointment for LSU. And it goes back to what I always say about football: as fancy and high tech as you can get, it comes down to blocking and tackling. And they haven't been very good at either this year. And that's basically the bedrock of LSU's problems.
And we thought that would be why they would still be good, even after losing Jaden Daniels and Malik Neighbors and Brian Thomas, is that you have this offensive line and everything looks better behind a good offensive line, but it just hasn't been there. So to wrap things up, Garrett Dellinger, they mentioned the Florida game as the earliest he could return. That always seemed a little unrealistic.
Yeah, that was a lip service or something. Like, that was
Do
never
we
going to
think
happen.
there's a chance? I mean, at this point, you don't need to rush a guy back for games that you're not making the college football playoff anyway. You're not competing for an SEC title anymore. You would like to see some cohesion and some growth in these last two games, and we'll get to that. But any chance you think Dellinger is back this week?
Maybe he could get back for this game, but it'd be tight. I mean, the early sort of recovery timelines you see for that tightrope surgery is like 26, 28 days. And whenever that happens, people are kind of like amazed, like, oh, wow, they came back so fast. It usually lasts a little bit longer, and it can vary based on how the guy's recovering. It's also a position that's tough to come back from quickly with that injury. And so, maybe he can get back for the Vanderbilt game. More likely would be if he was to return for Oklahoma. But then kind of like you're saying, this is a guy who's this is his last year of eligibility. And do you want to do something that could harm his NFL future? Because he's probably going to get drafted. Would it be a high draft pick? No, I don't think so. But he's probably going to get drafted, I would think. And you don't want to maybe mess that up for him by trying to get him back onto the field. And so we'll see what Dellinger does in all that. But just to emphasize why it's been a problem for LSU, Paul Mobinga, he's come in and over the past two games, he's allowed a total of 14 pressures and 10 hurries. And Florida was just coming straight up I guess in his case, the B gap, but kind of that middle pressure. He really struggled in this game. And you're seeing, I think, in this offensive line now, why it was a problem that LSU lost a guy like Marlon Martinez to the transfer portal. Someone who had some experience, who in this situation, when you lose a starter, could have come in. Now, don't fault Marlon. He went to go and try to play more. He wasn't going to start on this offensive line. But like with DJ Chester's issues, maybe you could have kicked him over to guard and played Marlon Martinez, who had some experience at center, play him at center. The loss of like him and a Lance Hurd, it hurt your depth and it limited your ability to be able to shuffle pieces around, especially when Tyree Adams had missed some time. You kind of were stuck with what you had. And it's also, though, a lot of young players on the offensive line who don't seem ready to contribute yet. And so now you've got this one injury to one of your starters, and you're not equipped to withstand that. And that's probably harder this day and age in college football to withstand those kinds of injuries, because coaches will often tell you at this level of college football, your depth is what gets affected the most by the transfer portal. In NIL, guys going to try to play somewhere sooner. But that's sort of what a situation that LSU has also put itself in by not really being able to withstand that. That's something that you have to be able to do if you're going to, an injury to one offensive lineman really shouldn't, I don't think, be so critical. Like it's a bad thing. You don't want to lose one of your best offensive linemen and all that. I'm not saying that it's like not something that is going to contribute to lack of success, but it shouldn't just like ruin your offense. And it feels like in some ways, losing that one player kind of has. But like you said, also the offensive line's been an issue all year, mostly in run blocking. So it's just a position that has not met expectations that were very, very high at the start of the season.
We said we'd play doctor. The medical chart for this offense is a mess. Like we've got all sorts of boxes checked. The injury report is brought to you by the Baton Rouge Clinic, your trusted healthcare provider in the heart of Baton Rouge. Whether you're in need of primary care, specialist services, or urgent care, the Baton Rouge Clinic has you covered with a team of dedicated and experienced professionals. Visit BatonRougeClinic.com to learn more or to schedule your appointment today. The Baton Rouge Clinic, caring for generations. Let's put a bow on the Florida game, guys. And we talked about the lack of explosives on offense. On the defensive side, giving up some explosives was really the biggest problem. They didn't force a turnover either. The offense only had one, but we talked about winning the turnover battle. You lose that. But by the way, the Keys to the Game segment is proudly sponsored by Associated Grocers. Need to get that in there. Join our team and support the success of local independent retail grocers. Apply today for available positions at Associated Grocers. So I don't know, Rab, like it kind of harkened back to early in the year, to last year a little bit, where you think LSU's kind of playing good defense, and then all of a sudden Florida pops a big play, set up both of their game-winning touchdowns in the fourth quarter.
Yeah, there were times when the defense got put in some tough spots and responded. Like the fumble, Nussmeier fumbled, Emory Jones picked it up, he fumbled, Florida got the ball, ended up punting. They got the ball like the LSU 34. They didn't even get to attempt a field goal. So great job there. But too many explosive plays, and of course you're left with the lasting impression of that long touchdown run that the Gators had to sew the game up by ball in the closing moments. And then after the game, you have Whitweek say, half the defense thought one thing was called and the other half thought something else was called, which probably happens more than we think. But in the current context of this team and this defense, it really shines a bad light on the whole.
A bad miscommunication there.
Yeah,
not a good look.
Yeah, it's not. And it's nothing anyone can accept or just say, well, that happens. It obviously shouldn't happen. So, yeah, it's just they never got to DJ Lagway, and he couldn't run. There was a lot of question. Remember going into this game, is he going to play because he had that hamstring injury against Georgia? Well, he played, but he was pretty much locked in the pocket. Nussmeier was more mobile than he was, but they couldn't get to him. And he's a big guy. He's tough to bring down, but they couldn't ever get to him. They affected him on a few passes. But the secondary gave up big plays. They gave up big running plays. 9 huge explosive plays over the course of a game. And Florida's offense was a little like LSU's, more feast or famine. But they hit enough big plays and just finally broke the game open. It's like they were hammering, and finally the dam broke in the fourth quarter. It was hard. It's easy to remember, or it's worth remembering. It was like a tie game, pretty late in the game, and then Florida just broke it open. But the defense, I think, more in this game than maybe even the Alabama game or any other game this year looks like last year's defense, and that's not something that anyone wants to see.
I would disagree with that. I don't think it looked like last year's defense. Last year's defense, you couldn't hang your hat on anything. And the defense, you couldn't hang your hat on much in this game either, I suppose. But like you said, it was really they'd given up 20 points pretty late into the fourth quarter. Last year's defense,
they would have taken that in a heartbeat.
Yeah, exactly. This game, I feel like pins a little bit more on the offense, but there are certainly some things defensively that LSU was not able to do in this game. And the one that you mentioned that stood out the most to me was not being able to get to DJ Lagway, who, even though he was not able to scramble at all, he was really good at moving around in the pocket and sort of shaping the pocket to what he needed it to be. And LSU's pass rushers just could not get to him. And I thought that was going to be a thing that changed this game and sort of, that Braden Swinson was going to have a big game. And I was very wrong with my feeling coming into this game where I thought LSU was going to win comfortably in the fourth quarter. That did not happen whatsoever. So my apologies for leading anyone astray because that was a big piece of it. Like you saw, Lagway threw that great the pass that you mentioned in the fourth quarter down to, it was like a 36-yard throw down to the 1 to set up Florida for the go-ahead touchdown. Braden Swinson gets a hand on his shoulder pad, and Lagway just kind of shakes him off and releases that throw. and he was making just dropping dimes all over the field in this game. Like he wasn't very efficient. There was a 50% completion rate in this game, but he would just hit these big plays when Florida needed them, especially there in the second half. And so that's the other thing that LSU's got to get better at here defensively over the next couple of weeks. You might say, oh, it's too late, but you still got some games here to play, is stopping the run. I mean, Florida averaged 6.6 yards per carry. They didn't run for a whole lot, only 113 yards, but they were, especially because of the 55-yard run there in the fourth quarter, they were really explosive on the ground. And now LSU has allowed 708 yards rushing over the past 3 games. That's a problem.
Pavia coming to town on Saturday.
Yeah, exactly. It's interesting you say that. Like Vanderbilt isn't, and I'm sure we'll get into this more on Thursday's podcast, that funky Vanderbilt offense and trying to defend Pavia magic and all that. Vanderbilt's only 84th in the country in rush yards per game. I thought it would have been more, but that's still a big piece of this is you've got to be more disciplined in your rush lanes and just better at stopping those sorts of things because Pavia is going to run and scramble all over the place, and that's something that's been hurting LSU this season, as we know.
Yeah, I mean, I'll just say this. I think we talked last Thursday about, well, how can Florida keep this close? And we didn't know Lagway was necessarily playing, but LSU appears to have all these advantages. And I think we brought up the point, well, Florida may be able to win the battle up front, and that may be where they can keep it close. And I think it's fair to say on both sides of the ball, Florida won the battle up front.
Absolutely.
Definitely.
So that ended up being the difference. So Tiger fans, Associated Grocers is hiring. Join a team committed to the success of independent retail grocers. Apply today at Associated Grocers and be part of something great. One bright spot from the game, Damian Ramos. 3 of 4 field goals. He did miss his first one, but that was a 51-yarder. He later hit a 50-yarder, which is his career long. And, just like when LSU is winning, not everything is going to be sunshine and roses. There are things to improve on. When they're losing, not everything is bad. Credit where credit's due. A couple weeks ago against A&M, the kicking operation failed, and Brian Kelly said, we're going to get that fixed. They appeared to get it fixed, and Ramos had a good day.
Yeah, and that was the case against Alabama as well. Yeah, against A&M, you had a bad kick and a bad hold and a bad snap on 3 different attempts in that game. And since then, it's better. No, he hasn't made every single kick, but and he doesn't have the range you would like to have either. But yeah, the whole operation has improved. They said they were going to improve on it, and that has come to pass. So yeah, it's a small thing. I wouldn't even call it a silver lining, yeah. But what is an improvement over what was a very bad situation against the Aggies?
Although the first kick was kind of a bad operation too. Like you said, it was a 51-yarder where it was sort of like, oh wow, they're putting him out there for what would be a career long, and it just came up short. It seemed like there maybe wasn't a great snap on that play either. But like you said, they ended up making the other 3, able to salvage something on those drives. But I'm sorry, I don't mean to take away from the star player segment. Good job, Damian Ramos, for taking advantage of most of your chances. It's just that this offense has got to start scoring touchdowns in the red zone and in the short area of the field. It's been so rough. The touchdown percentage for LSU this year is 60%. They rank 76th in the country in red zone touchdown percentage, and so you don't want to keep seeing Damian Ramos as much as you are.
It's usually a bad sign when the kicker is the star player, unless it's a game-winning situation or something.
But good for him for making a career long, because like we said, like his range, he's never made a kick over 50 yards in a game, and so he did that in this game, and that was a big spot to keep things close in the first half.
And nowadays in college, you want to have someone who's at least got a chance from 60. I mean, that's not too much. No, that's not too much to ask. You got guys who are starting to kick it longer. Look at Burrell. I'm surprised. Why didn't they put Burrell out there for a 50,
yeah, Brian Kelly has said he's attempted from 67 in practice, but he's not making them. Okay, well, not regularly anyway. Well, he's got a big leg, and in the future, LSU you might see him doing almost everything on special teams. He might even punt in the future. But yeah, it's got to be more accurate.
It can be a weapon. I mean, name of Florida's kicker is escaping me.
That's true, Trace Mack.
Yeah, but he, I mean, you saw where 55. He hit a couple of field goals, and that game was kind of going back and forth that were a big deal at the time. So it can be. The Star Player segment is proudly sponsored by Waste Pro. Ensure your tailgate or event is a hit with clean and convenient portable toilets from Waste Pro. Rent yours today. All right, we're going to take our second break, and when we come back, we'll kind of zoom out and talk more about the SEC title race, which unfortunately, LSU no longer a part of, and then we will begin to turn the page to the Vanderbilt game right after this.
You know how far I've gone, now I'm home again. At the Baton Rouge Clinic, our sole focus is to provide exceptional healthcare for your entire family so that you can get back to doing what you love most. We are caring for generations.
Since 1988, Classic Industrial Services, Inc. has led the industry in specialty contracting. From thermal insulation to scaffolding, coatings, and beyond, we cover it all. Every minute matters in our commitment to quality and safety. We're here to serve with roofing, siding, heat trace, and refractory services. Visit classicindustrial.com for more information.
Welcome back to the LSU Sports Insider. Kind of zooming out now, LSU 6-4. Talked about this a little bit in the postgame show on Saturday, Wilson, but one downside of the 12-team playoff is that it seems like everything is geared toward making it. The 14 playoff, obviously you still wanted to make it, but you understood that unless you had a really great team, you probably weren't going to, and so you're still chasing things in November and looking for a better bowl game and New Year's Six game and those things. Now that the 12-team playoff is here, it feels like that is so much more of the emphasis that when you're out of it, LSU still has 2 games left. It feels like the season's over.
Yeah, I mean, it is basically. You're, by all intents and purposes, because this is a program that you are going to be measured on how often you make the 12-team playoff, because you're a team in LSU that, I guess really since probably 2000, would usually be in the mix for that. And now, you're not at all. And this is a team that has to try to salvage what's left. You still want to try to win out. You don't want to go into the offseason, God forbid, 6-7 after losing, your last 6 games or something like that in a row. You don't want to be 7-5 at the end of the regular season. At least try to salvage what's left and put on, show some signs of improvement going into the offseason. Try to create a little bit of positivity within the program as you go into 2025. This is, though, a team now. This is a big test kind of for Brian Kelly here over the next few weeks. Like we said, this is the first time that his team here at LSU has lost 3 straight games. And now you had some players at the start of this game who did not play, Braden Swinston and Sage Ryan, in the first quarter for disciplinary reasons. You had a player in Deshaun Womack who did not travel. Again, that was not an injury situation. That was another discipline thing. And so Brian Kelly has to kind of just keep this thing together. He's got to. He talks a lot about accountability, about the process, about not allowing yourself to be dictated so much by outcomes. And this is a big test for him to be. It's kind of a culture test here over the last few weeks. Can you, after a skid like this, get your players to believe again, get your players to start, as he said on postgame Saturday, start fighting again? Because that was kind of the message to the team afterward, is who's going to be fighters. And they have to decide that here over the last few weeks, because you still have, at this point, you have pride to play for. And that's you don't have a championship to play for. You're not making the playoff, as you said, in terms of goals and what a program like LSU would want to accomplish. Those things are over. But you still should have pride in the name on the front and on the back of your jersey. And that's what's going to really dictate whether or not LSU can sort of show up for these next 2 games against teams that are kind of in the same boat as you are in terms of how this season has gone when you look at it collectively.
You talk about Vanderbilt, like they're not in this position that often. They're going to be playing hard, Rab. It's kind of a tricky game. What do you think the atmosphere in Tiger Stadium is like Saturday night?
I don't think it's going to be very good. Before I came over here, my wife was saying she was looking on Facebook and saying a lot of tickets and parking passes for sale, on social media or the secondary market. So, no, I don't think it's going to be very good for either of these games. The last game of the season is often difficult anyway, because it's Thanksgiving weekend and people are hunting and they're finding other things to do, especially if there's not much to play for. And there's not much to play for. Look, we were talking to a colleague after this game who used to cover South Carolina, and he said, well, South Carolina, you win 8 games, they love you. And even if you win 6 or 7 games, but you beat Clemson, they love you. That's not LSU. That's not LSU. I said this going into the season, and I certainly think it's true now. With the new 12-team playoff, your program, the position of LSU, with the history they have, there's two schools that have won 3 or more national championships this century, and this is one of them. And you don't make the playoff, it's pass-fail. You fail. This season has been a failure. It's turned out to be a failure. Unfortunately, that's true. It's very harsh, but that's true. And where you go forward from here, you have to be a contender, and it's still hard. I mean, it's still hard. Yeah, being in the top 4 was hard. This is not easy either to be in the. Basically, you have to shoot for being in the top 10 for sure to make it, because you get the group of 5 champion that's going to get in, and they're typically going to be ranked lower. Although we were talking about Boise could be a team that gets a bye, and one of the Big 12 or ACC champions, probably the Big 12 might have to play the first round. But anyway, they're not where they need to be, and for the first time, you're really questioning. Are they going forward? I knew this. I didn't think it was a championship team going into this year, but you want them to continue to make progress. Certainly, it seemed a 10-win season, 10 wins or more was again within reach, and it's just not. And now, that's all going by the boards, and it does come down to pride. You better play with pride and play hard, because there's no excuse for that. You can have deficiencies in talent, deficiencies in experience, stuff like that. But you can always play hard, and we're going to see how much they want to play these last 2 weeks.
I think there's pride on the line, and then the one tangible effect would be if you could win the last 2 games, go win a bowl game, and finish 9-4. You probably are more likely to get ranked preseason next year, and that does matter.
Yeah, it all counts.
Because when you talk about positioning for the playoff next year, it's just the nature of college football. Where you start does matter at least a little bit, and if they were to finish 7-6 or something, and maybe they're not ranked preseason next year, I mean that. Again, you're going to play your way into it or play your way out of it next year. But in some ways, the starting point does matter.
Well, regardless of the starting point, where they are in the polls at the start of the year next year, you play at Clemson week 1. So if you win that game, you shoot yourself back up pretty quick. So I don't think there's too much of that going on.
That's true. Any recruiting possibilities? Like we say this every week. It feels like these kids who are 17, 18-year-old recruits are not living and dying with the results like fans are. They're not going to decommit because LSU lost a couple games, and they're not the ones who are considering are not going to commit just because they won a couple of games. But is there any residual effect if some of these recruits look up at the end of the season and say, "Oh, LSU went 7-5, and this other school I'm considering went 10-2"? I mean, do you think with National Signing Day so early, is there any impact there?
We'll have to see. I don't know for sure right now. Obviously, there was an offensive lineman, Devin Harper, I believe. Let me make sure because I don't want to say
I put
it
you
was
on the spot.
That
here,
wasn't that correct name. Yeah, Devin Harper flipped from LSU to Ole Miss right after the game, but that was something that was kind of in the wind. There could be a couple other flips before signing day. We'll just kind of have to see if those things end up happening. Guys who are like out of state, if they end up staying closer to home, that kind of thing. But that's another big piece of this here. Over the next few weeks, LSU does have to now keep this class together. I think it's helped that a lot of these guys committed to LSU even well before the season started. And oftentimes, I don't think, like as you said, recruits are as affected necessarily by what happens within a season, at least the large majority of your class, especially now that stuff has been so accelerated in terms of recruiting and becoming earlier and earlier and earlier where people make decisions. But you do still have a lot of big name recruits you got to hold on to here, and you've got a guy in Jakeem Stewart who's still out there undecided. And that's probably the big thing is Jakeem Stewart not having picked where he wants to go to school yet. Maybe he's looking at those results and the trajectory of a program a little bit more than somebody who is already committed to LSU. But you do have to here keep everything together because that's what's giving you confidence moving forward is this 2025 class. With a guy like Bryce Underwood, Harlem Berry, and a lot of the other top recruits that they have, DJ Pickett, it gives you some feeling like, okay, this season hasn't been great, but maybe if this class turns into what everybody thinks it can be, then that's your foundation for a championship run moving forward. So you do have to really keep those things together here over the next couple of weeks until signing day on December 4th.
Absolutely. All right, so we'll wrap things up first with our Around the SEC segment. It's brought to you by Classic Industrial Services, because at Classic Industrial Services, every minute matters. Scott, big game on Saturday was Georgia defeating Tennessee. That kind of creates more of a logjam. Both of those teams now have 2 losses. You end up with Texas and Texas A&M, the 2 teams left with 1 SEC loss, and of course they play each other to end the season. So we've got kind of this, we thought this might happen in a 16-team SEC. You're going to have a logjam at the end.
Yeah, those 2 teams tied with 1 loss. and then you have four 2-loss teams behind them: Georgia, Alabama, Ole Miss, and Tennessee. Everybody's still, got some chances. Ole Miss, I didn't think of much of their chances. I don't know how the percentages break out. We were talking after the game, Wilson and I think Wilson said Alabama's path is looking a lot better at this point.
Alabama's the most likely team in that group of two lost SEC teams to make it to the SEC title game at this point. If they win out, I think they're pretty much in for the SEC title game against the winner of Texas A&M.
So, but it's fascinating. with 2 weeks to go, you still have so many teams in play, and that's great. And you figure, well, Alabama probably went out, but they got a rivalry game with Auburn. We certainly see that game, end up with some crazy results over the years. So so that's not out of the realm of possibility that something could happen there. But there's enough left of the season that it's very exciting, and you still don't know exactly who you're going to see. Those two teams in Atlanta. So, and of course, it affects the college football playoff. But also the point, I think people are going to find as the playoff goes on, you're going to love being the number 5 seed. If Georgia, you want to win. You want to win a championship every year in the SEC and stuff like that. But if Georgia is like, they got 2 losses, they don't make it. But then they're the 5 seed and get to host a first round playoff game, and then move on and maybe play not the strongest team.
You'd play the 2 lowest rated champions, right? You play 12, and then if you win that, you play 4.
Yeah, so, I mean, boy, that's going to be a pretty good setup for the teams are going to like, I think, because you go to the conference championship game with 2 losses, you're certainly afraid that you're going to get left out. And you wouldn't run that risk. And Saban pointed out before, they won 2 national championships at Alabama under the old format, the 4-team format, without making it to the SEC championship game. So it could happen then. It can happen even more now.
Yeah, we'll talk about the odds here in a second. First, want to let you know today's episode of LSU Sports Insider is brought to you by Classic Industrial Services, proudly serving Louisiana and the entire United States. With metal siding and roofing, steam and electric tracing systems, industrial and commercial coatings, and much more. From large capital projects to commercial projects or your small quick response needs, Classic Industrial is your go-to for quality and safety. They're not just about business, they're a proud community partner, supporting local initiatives and helping build a stronger Baton Rouge. Because at Classic Industrial Services, every minute matters. Now we go into our sports betting segment, brought to you by the Queen of Baton Rouge. Experience the thrill of game day at 1717 Kitchen and Cocktails, your premier destination for elevated sports entertainment. And Wilson, to your point about Alabama's path being the easiest, they're actually at DraftKings now the second favorite to win the SEC. Texas is plus 145. You got Alabama right behind them, plus 150. Georgia plus 310, kind of sitting there if either of those teams should slip up. Texas A&M 17-1, and then Ole Miss and Tennessee are long shots to even get in the game at this point. But it does set up interesting weekend. I mean, there's no game that jumps off at you, but 3 of these teams in this conversation is Ole Miss is at Florida. You just saw how difficult that could be. Alabama's at Oklahoma, and which looked like a huge game before the year began and still could be tricky. And then Texas A&M is at Auburn. So 3 kind of road tests for these teams to stay in the hunt going to the final week.
Yeah, I mean, all 3 of those teams are going on the road, like you said. And that's right?
Yeah, all on the road, yeah. I believe, yeah.
And that's a tough thing to do in the SEC.
A lot of teams have not won big games on the road this year. There haven't been many of those, right? Georgia going to Texas comes to mind, but it haven't been.
The home team has won a lot of the big games. Alabama came to LSU and won.
I was going to mention that one. I guess, but I'd have to go back and look at it, but I think y'all are probably right. I mean, LSU went on the road to beat South Carolina. But, yeah, in general here, the home fields have been tough to go to and win at. And so, on paper, the favorites should all win those games and maybe without too much trouble even. I mean, if Ole Miss plays like it did against Georgia, then they should be able to go and win at Florida. But if they play like they did against Kentucky, then, then Florida could spring the upset. Lagway was really, really impressive in this against LSU in particular, and he's going to have a tougher time with Ole Miss's defensive front. But that's still a game where you'll have to see how it plays out. Crazy things happen in college football that you don't see coming, and maybe this weekend will be one, or maybe it'll be kind of regular, in which case it would set up a particularly electric rivalry weekend.
Especially in College Station, that game will be
awesome.
lit, as the kids say. All right, Tiger fans, you can catch all the sports action at the Queen Casino's DraftKings Sportsbook Bar and 1717 Kitchen and Cocktails. With top-notch screens and live betting, it's the ultimate spot to watch your favorite teams and enjoy a cold brew or a signature cocktail. The Queen Casino is the only land-based casino in Baton Rouge and your go-to for game day or any day. Visit today and elevate your sports watching experience. Any final thoughts, guys? Just kind of the end of anything meaningful for LSU. What bowl game they going to, Rab? Where are you going in New Year's time?
It's not going to be anything too
one
exciting.
of those group of 6 bowls.
Where the SEC picks who goes where. The Texas Bowl looks like a good possibility for LSU. The Gator Bowl, which LSU's in the Texas Bowl just 3 years ago,
and they were just in Vegas to start the season.
Yeah,
you wouldn't think they'd go to the Vegas Bowl,
but they went to Florida State. They played in Orlando twice. Or back-to-back games, rather, with the Citrus Bowl and a Florida State game. So that could happen. The Gator Bowl, I think, is not a big bowl, but that would be a good one. LSU hadn't played in the Gator Bowl since 1987. And I know in the past they've tried to figure out how to get LSU. They just haven't fallen to them. So this might be that season. But I don't think any bowl should expect a whole LSU fans to buy a lot of tickets, no matter where they're going. It's the disappointment level is that high, and it's not the playoff. It's those bowls are even more marginalized. I'm glad they're still there. I'm a big bowl proponent, but it's not looking too exciting for LSU in that regard.
The rest of the bowls need to do like what the Pop-Tarts Bowl and the Duke's Mayo Bowl has done, which is turn it into kind of like much more of an entertainment product off the field. I don't know if y'all saw today, the Pop-Tarts Bowl, they're going to have the MVP of the game gets to choose between 3 different flavor of mascot and which one gets eaten after the
roast,
game. Yeah. And obviously the Duke's Mayo's Bowl with pouring the mayonnaise on the head coach's head. More bowls need to do stuff like that.
That would be appealing. A lot of people would like to see Brian Kelly dunked in mayonnaise around the country.
Now, what with the Gator Bowl? There's got to be something we can do with the Gator.
You have to fight an alligator.
Yeah. Throw you in the St. Johns River. Yeah, right. To the game. You jump in.
The ReliaQuest Bowl, we're going to need something there. That one's tough. It used to be the Outback Bowl. There were more possibilities.
That one was great. You had like the bloomin' onion and everything. No, that one was fun.
I forget what they did. I think there's some kind of IT security thing. They had some big explanation last year. We're like, I'm glad to know you don't know what you guys are.
Yeah, build the brand. All right, speaking of building the brand, subscribe to the YouTube channel, the LSU Sports at NOLA.com YouTube channel. We're getting close to 4,000 subscribers. We'd love to get there before the end of the year. So hit the like button. If you're watching on Facebook, go over to YouTube. It's a cool place. We post other videos besides the podcast. So if you're listening to the audio version or watching on Facebook, the YouTube page is still worth checking out, subscribing. Easier to comment on YouTube as well. So
subscribe. LSU's faltered, but our podcast game has been strong.
Yeah, it wasn't our fault they lost to Florida. That's right. Amelia Cotton's our producer. She does a wonderful job. He's Scott Rabalais and Wilson Alexander. I'm Zach Ewing, and we'll be back with another podcast on Thursday.